Welcome to the Demeere podcast. We talk about martial arts, self-defense, and a whole lot more. And now your host, Demeere.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 55 of the podcast. And this is the end of the year. So 2020 is finally coming to an end. A lot of people will be happy about that, me included. So as you often get at this time of year, I'd like to do a little bit of a review of some of the things that happened, and then also give you an update of what hopefully I can plan for 2021. But as always, before we start, a quick shout out to one of my patrons. And this time I am going to give a huge thank you to J. Collins Murphy for being one of my Orange Belt patrons. And you joined a few months ago. I hope you found the experience very much worth it so far, because there's quite a large archive of material on my Patreon already. So, J. Collins Murphy, thank you for your support. As always, it's thanks to you and all my other patrons that this podcast is possible. So, folks, if you want to help out, you can go to wimsblog.com/donate. There's a bunch of links there to the Patreon, to PayPal, and a bunch of other options if you prefer those. Whatever you can share, that's great. That helps out a lot and makes actually this podcast, my blog, and a lot of other stuff that is still in the pipeline. That's what makes it possible. So thank you guys, and check that out, and on with the show. So before we start, wimsblog.com/55, the numbers, that's where you will find the links of what you can hear in this episode. Now, first things first, I went over the stats for my blog and for my podcast for the last year, just to look at what was most popular throughout the year. I pretty much always do that just so I have a better idea of what people are actually finding interesting. This is one of the weirdest things for me as an instructor and as a teacher, is that sometimes I'll write a blog post or an article or a book even, or do an episode on the podcast about a topic that I think people will find really interesting, and that I think, hopefully I managed to convey a lot of useful information, and it falls just totally flat. It's as if nobody's interested. And then other times, for instance, on my Facebook page, I'll make like an offhand comment, or make a meme about something, or write like a few paragraphs on something just top of my head, and it just pretty much almost goes viral and people love it. And it makes no sense to me at all when that happens. So this is one of those things where you notice that what's going on in your head and in your training is often very much at odds with what other people are doing. And that's one of the reasons why I like feedback so much, because it allows me to have a better idea of what people actually think, and what they're doing, what they find useful, and what not. The whole point of having a blog like I do, or doing a podcast, is that people find value in the information, that they can use it for their training. So if that's not the case, then I'm messing up. So I always like to go over the stats, specifically at the end of the year, just to get a little bit of an overview of how things were. So without further ado, the top 3 blog posts that were shared, the top 3 podcast episodes that were just massively downloaded. And starting from number 3, and that was episode 48, which was an interview with Demeere McCracken. I really enjoyed doing that interview, because Tammy is both very well versed in the psychological aspects of not only violence, but also how the human mind works, obviously professionally speaking. But also she's a Krav Maga instructor, and basically somebody who's extremely competent also in that area. So when you combine the two, looking at both the technical aspects of self-defense and everything around self-defense, but also the psychological part of it, what's going on in people's minds and how do people function on that level. That's why I really enjoyed talking to her, and she gave some very good insights, not just on self-defense, but on many other topics, and in particular in the bonus episodes that I did on Patreon. So I really enjoy that. And I think that kind of explains why this one came in at number 3 already for this year, because it was, I think, a really, really interesting talk that we managed to have. And I very much enjoyed it. So if you guys haven't checked that out, that's go to wimsblog.com/48, and then you can listen to Tammy and me talk about everything. So then let's move on to the second most listened episode of this year. And that was number 47. That was the interview I did with Toby Cowan, who talked about surviving the coronavirus crisis. Now, one of the reasons why I wanted to do the talk with Toby, and he was kind enough to spend the time, we were very much at the beginning of the pandemic at that time. Now, for most of us, this is unheard of. This is uncharted territory. We've never been in a pandemic. We've never had a crisis this size, where basically the whole world was grinding to a halt. Commerce was just stopped dead in its tracks in many regards, and a lot of people were scared and didn't know what to do. So I wanted to have a survival expert like Toby on the show, so he could talk from his perspective and his experience. And that's what Toby does. He's a survival expert, not just in the wilderness, but also obviously in urban environments, and very experienced, very knowledgeable. And I really enjoyed talking to him and found it that he had a lot of useful things to say when it comes to not just the practical parts of preparing for it, but also the psychological aspect, which is what a lot of people right now are also experiencing. The kind of, you have different phases to a pandemic, and for instance, here in Belgium right now, we are just getting, well, it's touch and go right now. But we're kind of either at the end of the second wave or at the beginning of the third wave. It's kind of hard to see which one it'll be. It can go either way, especially now that it's the holidays as I type this. So as I talk about this, sorry guys. And that means that either people will actually stick to the restrictions and then not get together massively, or they won't, and then we'll have another uptick in January. We'll see how that goes. But one of the things that Toby predicted also is that people get tired of it, and that's where we are at right now. So people are tired of the pandemic and the restrictions and the lockdowns and all that. So they start revolting, and then obviously the governments have to react to that, which again, this is happening here. Now, again, I don't know how things are where you live, because the experience of this pandemic is very different depending on where you live and who you are. Now, here in Belgium, where I am, it actually turned out to be much better than I anticipated or feared, basically, because our government is not that functional, to put it mildly. We didn't even have a true government when the pandemic hit, but that's another story. I'm not going to bore you guys with that. Point is that in other countries, for instance, from everything that I've heard, is that Italy was really, really bad. South American countries also were hit really hard by that. So where you lived was a large factor in determining what your experience was for the last 9 to 10 months. Meaning that for you, things might not have been all that relevant, what Toby talked about, and for somebody else, it might have been of life-saving quality. And I'm not exaggerating. So that's why I was really happy that Toby spent the time talking to me, and we got to cover a lot of stuff, including in the bonus podcast. So that was really useful information, I hope, for a lot of people. And I'm very happy we got to do that. Right. So, and then we have number 1, the most listened to episode this year. Funny enough, that is episode 49. So we had 48, 47, and now 49. And that is one I did, which I titled, "Which Self-Defense Lessons Can We Learn from the Pandemic?" My take on that one was pretty much, okay, so we're going through this really bizarre time, and everything is turned upside down, and nobody really knows, what the future holds. There's a lot of speculation, but we know there are massive changes happening and also still on the way. But at the same time, how will that change our daily lives? What's going on, and how can we prepare for that? And also, primarily, what can we learn self-defense wise from living through such a pandemic? Now, I'm not going to rehash everything here, so go to wimsblog.com/48 49, and you can listen to it there. But I was also happy to see that people kind of, enjoy that episode and listen to it a lot, and hopefully that you found that one useful as well. So that's it for the top 3 for this year. I hope that would have, well, let me put it differently. If it were up to me and everything would have been fine, if the pandemic wouldn't have hit, I would have been able to do a lot more podcasts. But that's just not how it worked out. And I'll talk a bit more in a few minutes about that, why it happened the way it did. So moving on to top 3 blog posts of this year. And it's pretty static in the sense that for the last few years, the top 5 and the top 10 of the blog posts that I have that get the most views are relatively static, which is good, I guess. Means that they've turned into evergreen content, but it's kind of bad at the same time, because it means that my more recent writing apparently doesn't strike the same chord. So who knows? Anyway, let's start with number 3. The sort of third most read post on my blog is Boxing for Self-Defense, Is It Effective? And again, I'll put the link in the show notes. I recently got interviewed by Chris Hansen, and who's got a great channel, by the way, and a podcast. And he asked me why I did I write something about boxing. And it is true that most of you guys know me for my Chinese and other martial arts that I practice and teach, but not a lot of people know me as a boxer per se. Now, to be clear, I don't claim to be one. My boxing is hybrid at best. It's not pure traditional boxing as you learn it in a boxing gym, but I've always had a great fondness for it. And so I wanted to do something for that. And after I wrote this blog post, Boxing for Self-Defense, Is It Effective? That one, when it came out, I mean, that went viral. A lot of people loved it, and it really got a lot of feedback from that. And that's why I decided to write the book, which is the first in a series. And that book has done extremely well. So a huge thank you to everybody who bought it. Very glad to see that you enjoyed it. There's a lot more coming on that front. And again, I'll talk a little bit more in a few minutes about the follow-up books in that series. But that blog post is basically one of the evergreens right now on my site that just people keep on reading that one. So very happy about that too. Now, number 2, and that is 8 self-defense tips for men. Now, every now and then, this one goes viral again. For whatever reason, I just see a massive uptick on traffic to my website, to my blog, for that specific article. Apparently, it tends to resonate with people. Again, I'm also very happy with that. And one of the keys to it, I think, is that I don't talk about a single physical technique, not one fighting technique. It's all about things that aren't physical fighting, but are very important tips to remember. And guidelines, if you will, that can help you stay out of trouble. Or if you do end up in trouble, just give you a better focus to work towards that can bring you back to safety, as opposed to in a deeper mess than that you're already in. So 8 self-defense tips for men. And as I've also explained, I've written about, I have to check again, but I've written a bunch of chapters already in the book that will have a similar title, and I'm expanding on the number of tips. So that's one that is also coming in the future, which is basically just extrapolating from the original 8 self-defense tips for men, and then digging in deeper and practical, a lot more practical advice, not just saying like, you need to do this, but also how do you do that? And I give the readers the tools to actually implement that advice into their own life, and then hopefully, again, be able to stay safe. Right, and then drumroll please. So we've got the number one blog post that you guys went to my blog for this year. And that one is titled, The Myth of Military Hand-to-Hand Combat Systems. Now, this is actually a 2-part post, but this first one, apparently also, a lot of people enjoyed that. As some of you may know, I tend to slaughter sacred cows a lot. I'm not a big fan of overhyped, commercialized, marketing. So that's not really my thing. I understand the need for marketing, but back when I was with Paladin Press, before Paladin Press stopped operating and closed down after the founder passed away, it was kind of a joke, because they would make the marketing. It was like the ultimate system of still defense, and the guys over at Paladin, we talked about that, and they joked, we've done so many ultimate still defense systems. Every day we kind of find a new one. So we joked a little bit about that, and it's not about that. Again, I understand the need for marketing, but there's this kind of inherent marketing with when you look at military hand-to-hand combat systems, because obviously if it's military, it's effective, right? It's supposed to be. Of course, and I'm not discounting that. But there are issues there, and because this kind of implies that it's effective because it's military, so everything else isn't really as effective because these are soldiers, they go to war. So yeah, I mean, can't be that the civilian stuff is better than that, right? Because you're a civilian, you're not a soldier, you don't go to war, so there's no way that your stuff is better than that soldier stuff, right? And that kind of logic, that kind of implication is something that I disagree with. And I wrote a long blog post about the many reasons why what is often taught as a military hand-to-hand combat system, it gets blown up to mythical proportions, where in fact there are many different aspects to it and factors that you have to understand to place it in its proper context. And those have nothing to do with the effectiveness of the techniques, but they have very much something to do with how you as a civilian will use those systems. For instance, one of the key points is that by definition, a soldier will almost always be armed with firearm, hand weapon, knives, and so on. So the default is that as a soldier, you do not go into battle unarmed. Hand-to-hand combat is the last thing you want to do. So that changes things. Whereas as a civilian in many countries, being unarmed is the standard. And that's very different. Another thing is that, for instance, rules of engagement and the Geneva Convention, they apply when it comes to war, but very often lethal force is pretty much the first thing that is on the table. Now, yes, I know the last 2 decades things have changed, blah blah blah. I'm not going to rehash, current affairs basically. But if you watch at the history of, let's say, the last few thousand years of warfare, you'll see that lethal force was very much one of the primary options, to put it mildly. Whereas for you as a civilian, lethal force is not the first thing you want to jump to in any situation. Why? Well, because you have to face the legal system afterwards, and you better be justified if you use lethal force. So for that, and for many reasons, and another one is that soldiers, in principle, hardly ever fight alone. There are soldiers who operate alone, but they're in the minority, and by that I mean very much in the minority. So it's not as if every soldier is just the old Chuck Norris movie, a force of one. He's just going out there by all by his lonesome self, no backup, no team, no nothing, and he's just taking out enemy combatants left and right. That's typically not how it works. Again, barring the exceptions. So in that article, I very much look at all those factors, and some people got really upset about it. Other people, but I asked a lot of my friends who were active military or who are veterans. I did my military service here in my country as well, so I took a little bit of my own experience. And what is it like, the hand-to-hand combat that you learned? What did you learn? How many hours did you spend learning it, and so on? And there's a lot of really eye-opening information for people who have bought into that marketing of the ultimate, fighting systems. So I'll leave it at that. So these are the 3 most popular blog posts of this year. I hope to write a few more that hopefully will rival those. I'm working on a blog post right now, which is going to talk about how to train with edged weapons, in which I'm going to take the approach of the same idea of that, okay, not looking at techniques, but some of the things that are neglected that I feel are vital to train correctly and to get the most out of your training. And also that you train in such a way that if you would ever need that kind of training, that you can actually pull it off. So that is hopefully a blog post that you guys will enjoy, and a lot more to come. And that kind of brings me to the next part of this episode, which is taking a look at what the hell happened. Well, I had a lot of plans for 2020, and obviously around, I think it was late February, when I discovered basically what was going to happen, that's when I started understanding that this whole COVID-19 thing was going to be a lot more serious than a lot of people at that stage were still claiming, like it's just another flu and so on. And regardless of what you think about it, the fact that there was such massive change and problems with supply chain and companies just stopping operating completely, and with everything that entailed from China throughout the rest of the world, in a global integrated economy, this kind of thing is not something that you can just get over it in a few weeks if it happens. That's not how it works nowadays. And I very quickly realized that a lot of problems were heading our way. So a few weeks after that, when we'd done most of our preparing and so on, and then the lockdowns started happening. So I had to figure out a way to figure out, what do I do now? Not just do something, but make sure that I do something useful. Obviously, as I wasn't allowed to work, my income took a severe hit because of the lockdown. And that was in March and April. I wasn't allowed to do any private training. So I took a hard look at all the projects I had in the pipeline at various stages of development, made a decision to speed up some plans, and I made a bunch of new ones. So some of these things already are operational. So that's the first one is my online Tai Chi Chuan membership site, in which I teach pretty much everything that there is to know about the Tai Chi Chuan style that I practice, which is a martial art. We practice it as a self-defense art as opposed to just for health. It's the closest thing you can get to being in one of my classes, because I teach a class normally twice a week. But again, that's also stopped now because of the lockdowns and the restrictions. But that's the best way to describe it. All the stuff that I would show you in class, I would show you, you will eventually get there. So first thing I did was do a lot of filming. Fortunately, it was great weather here in Belgium for once, and I was able to do a lot of videos outside, and then spend much more time than I care to remember on editing everything, and then doing the voiceover. The voiceover work was also very, very tiresome. It's a lot of work, but I was very happy to eventually launch the site in August. And now every month I just add more videos to it. So there's a lot of content online already. The short form is available, a lot of basic exercises, a lot of theory already. In the last few months, I've started adding the self-defense aspect, so that for every part of the form, you learn a self-defense technique. And what's to come? Well, obviously, the auto forms, the weapon forms, obviously the weapon training, the pushing hands, and so on, and so much more. So a lot of things, for instance, that I would tell my students during class that are not necessarily a part of the classical curriculum, but are crucial in understanding on how to apply the art in a modern environment. I would quickly explain those things to students in class when it comes up, but it's not part of the curriculum. So usually a lot of teachers don't mention it, just how the brain works under adrenal stress and so on. Well, I go into detail about that in videos there. So that is something that I'm very proud of. It's my contribution to the art, and it's an ongoing thing. So it's going to take a while to get the full curriculum online. It's a tremendous amount of work, but I always planned on doing it. Never really had the time, and then all of a sudden I had time. I said, okay, I'm going to jump. going to commit to this project and keep going. So that's the first thing. The second thing, I looked at something that a lot of people were asking, like, okay, how can I work out? The gyms are closed. And I did a video called Resistance Band Full Body Home Workout. I've been using resistance bands for a long time for my own training, for rehab, for when I'm traveling and there's no gym available and so on. So they're extremely versatile resistance bands, and pretty much anybody can use them. Now, there's a difference between them being versatile and them being easy to work with just out of the box. You actually need to know how to train correctly and how to use it correctly. And that's what I try to do with that video, just give a lot of information on how to do specific exercises for pretty much every body part, and then do coordination exercises, do functional training with it, and so on. That was all filmed in one day, so that was a long day for me. And then I did again a lot of editing, and that one's live too. Again, I'll put all the links in the show notes so you guys can find that. Now, weirdly enough, one of the things that I also started doing a lot more was Zoom private training. So some of my own clients and then new people came to me and wanted to do Zoom training, which is basically me going in the attic here where I live, and I have some training space there, putting the laptop on, firing up the webcam, and we do a Zoom training where I show the exercises and I can see actually the other person doing them and correct them. So it's kind of like one-on-one training, but from a distance. Very strange at first. I've been doing a lot of consulting work via video chat, but not necessarily training, because I wasn't really happy with the way that Skype was working. I've been working with Skype for years, and then Zoom started becoming a success. Switched to that, and very happy with that. And that's actually expanding now, that kind of business. So that was a surprise to me, but I rolled with it. But the downside of that is also that it meant that, I did not have as much free time as I thought I would have, because I wasn't allowed to work with clients. So good for me, but, very strange to all of a sudden find yourself so much more in front of your computer. Anyway, these are some of the projects that happened. Now, another big change this year is that I moved in with my girlfriend after many years, because my kids are now both off to college. So there was no reason to keep my apartment anymore, and I moved in. That was a lot more difficult, as you can imagine, than in a normal year when there's not a pandemic going on. But that's pretty much over now. Pretty much settled in. Some stuff that needs to be worked out as well. But overall, life is a little bit better now, in the sense that I don't have to spend as much time on the road going from my place to hers than I used to. So that's a good thing. And we're both very private people, which is probably a surprise to some of you, because you're used to me talking so much. But in my personal life, I'm pretty private. Don't go out to party all the time, and so we were just very happy during the lockdown that we were together, and then we would just do our own thing and stay at home, which is what we enjoy doing anyway. So life is good. So we made it permanent, and I moved in. Big change. Now, alongside with that, and for many reasons that would take way too long to go into, but primarily they have to do with some of the changes that I see happening, the way that society will work, the way that exercise and training will work in the future. And that doesn't mean that we won't go back to how things were before the pandemic hit, but I think there will be a fundamental change. Let's say new ways of teaching and training. If you look up tonal, look up Demeere. If you don't know what that is, I'll see if I can put a link in the show notes. Just new technology being used to help people train really well. I mean, it's very, very potent technology that changes the game if you're a personal trainer like me. So I decided for that reason, and for many, many more, but again, it takes too long to explain everything. There's many factors coming together. So I made a shift earlier this month, and I informed my patrons first in a special bonus episode about that. And the shift is that I'm going to do a lot more stuff online. I've actually been doing that. Some of the stuff is behind the scenes, and I won't be able to go public with that maybe ever, because I'm collaborating with a company on something that I won't be able to talk about at least for a very long time. But also do a lot of my own stuff more publicly and just be more active. What does that mean? Well, for one, make sure that my patrons are happy. So I'm shifting my focus a little bit away from social media. As you guys know, I'm very active on my Facebook page. Pretty much every day I post something. But a lot of times I would post like basically articles and several paragraphs on something, or breakdowns of videos and so on, and leave it up on Facebook. Well, a lot of that stuff will shift over to Patreon. Some of it will be free to view for everybody, so I'll make that public, but a lot of it will be patrons only. Why? Well, one of the things that was made very clear to me during this pandemic is that it's my patrons who supported me financially throughout this difficult period. So not that wasn't clear before, but that lesson was really driven home now, thanks to the pandemic. And so I want to reward them on the one hand, and on the other hand, make sure that they're happy with their experience. So patrons get more content. So that's the first thing. Second thing, more regular podcast episodes. And that's what I mentioned before. Again, because my life was turned upside down like most everybody else's during this pandemic, the podcast suffered. Basically stopped doing it for a while because it was just too much. I was spending so much time in front of my computer doing so many things. There's stuff that I can't talk about now. I stopped working with the company that I worked with for 10 years. There was no bad blood or anything. It's just that I had to make choices. I couldn't do everything anymore. There was too much stuff, and there's only 24 hours in a day, so I had to make choices. And I decided to stop my work with Technogym, which I very much enjoyed. Awesome company, but it just that it wasn't compatible anymore. I had to make choices, and some other projects and other work that I did with companies. Both I very much enjoyed, but also think that in the long run, I think that would be a better match for me and martial arts and self-defense things that I do. So stopped working with them, and then decided to use a part of the time that was freed up to do more stuff online. And that means podcast interviews. I want to interview a bunch of people. I've reached out to some have confirmed, but it's going to be a while. It's going to be January before we can record it. And hopefully you guys will enjoy that too. So that should be fun. Next, I've done a few already live training sessions on Facebook, and I've done 2 on hip mobility. And that's basically a workout where, again, I'm in front of my computer in my training area, and we go through a hip mobility stretching and mobility training session. About an hour and a half. It's actually a little bit longer. And I think it was like $4 or $5 or something for that session. And once you buy the ticket, you can rewatch the video afterwards. So I hadn't worked with Facebook for that kind of stuff before, but actually it works quite well. Except for the second session, then all of a sudden the video feed cut out, so I had to start things up again. But other than that, it was a really fun experience. One of the key things for me is that I've been teaching classes for 30 years now, and I haven't been able to do that consistently for since the pandemic started. So I really miss teaching, and this is kind of like not the same but similar. So I enjoyed that a lot. We have another one that I will announce soon, and that's going to be on shoulder mobility. So a 90-minute workout, training session, me explaining how it works and some theory and so on. Obviously, with my shoulder issues that I've had in my surgery, you guys know that I am very well acquainted with shoulder issues. So that's going to be fun, and we'll see where it goes. I mean, I'm open to suggestions. I asked the people who attended if there were other kind of sessions that they wanted to do. So there were some good ideas there. and I'll do more of that. If you want to stay up to date, you have to follow my Facebook page. Yes, I have a notification list. If you go to wimdemeere.com/notification, you can sign up to be notified when I have a new book or video out. But I'm not I hate being spammed, so I don't like to use that list a lot with everything that I do, except for, again, book and video launches, or when there are like special offers or discounts, which I sometimes do. But I don't bombard that list with emails. So go over to my Facebook page, and then you'll be notified by events there. Right. So what else? Well, I started a long time ago. I bought a domain name, and then finally this year I pulled the trigger on that one as well. So MMAformula.com. So that is where I do my mixed martial arts stuff. As you guys know, I never saw the need to hate combat sports because I enjoy traditional martial arts and vice versa. I think both are awesome. So I've done competitive combat sports pretty much my entire adult life. So why would I hate that? So, but the thing is, there's not a lot of overlap between the audience of, let's say, MMA and Tai Chi Chuan and Kung Fu and other traditional martial arts. So I wanted to separate them, and I started first a separate Facebook page for that, and then bought the domain name, and now MMAformula.com. So the website is live. So what's that about? That's just me talking about mixed martial arts. And the main thing that is getting a lot of traction right now, that's the YouTube channel, in which I am nowadays most known on that channel for the knockout analysis videos that I do. So that's just you see Uriah Hall knockout Anderson Silva. Okay, well, what on a technical level did he do? How did he do it? What can you take away from it? What went wrong? What went right? And so on. So that's the main thing that people know the channel from. But I also do technique analysis. I show some drills and some of the stuff that I do in class I put online and explain why we do it and so on. So if you're into mixed martial arts, that's something you might enjoy. And I started a podcast for that as well. So we only have about 3 episodes right now, but I'm going to record the next one, hopefully early next week, in which I'm going to give the MMA Formula Awards of the Year, which has interesting categories like finally a heavyweight that doesn't suck award, or Dick Move of the Year award, and so on. So that's something that I enjoy doing. And then obviously the last thing that you can expect that I'm going to focus on is writing. More on my blog. Like I said, the training with edged weapons is the first big blog post that I'll do. And then I'm going to try to do a bunch more just to be more active on my blog, because I've kind of neglected it the last few years. So much going on. Something had to give. I'm everything you guys see or hear that is from me, I'm the guy doing it. Meaning I'm creating the content, editing, and so on. So, and that is beside having a day job and actually having several day jobs almost. So, but as my focus shifts more towards the online venues, then the blog needs some attention too. And of course, books. That I'm still writing books, so that's not going to go away. Next one is going to be Boxing for Self-Defense 1.5, which is about combinations, which is something that I couldn't put in the first one. It's not really going to fit into the second one. And if I do it after the third one, it might actually be the fourth one that would have included it, but then that would be really late in the process and so on. So for a variety of reasons, I decided to call it, Boxing for Self-Defense 1.5. And that is something that as soon as you finish the first one, you can start using the information there. It's about combinations. How do you use combinations as opposed to single strikes? Right, that's it, guys. Long podcast, long explanations. Not that long a podcast. I'm looking 39 minutes. It's not that bad. But point is that it's been a crazy year for pretty much everybody. Me, you, everybody, and we're not out of the woods yet. Here in Belgium, it's going to be at least 3 more months of restrictions, at least. We're talking about, end of March, easy. And with a little bit of luck, by April, May, we'll get some easing up on the restrictions. And with a little bit of luck, by summer, and I'm talking June, July, normally August, the worst should be over, and there should be a lot of easing of restrictions, and more or less normal life should resume by the end of 2021. Which means that it still sucks, it's still not awesome, but it's going to be a whole lot better than it has been for a long, long time. But for at least the first 3 months, it's just hanging in there. I hope wherever you are, as you're listening to this, that you can stay the same, that things get better there too. If they're already better, I heard that New Zealand is doing pretty good, guys. If you're over there, enjoy. Everybody else, we just have to hang tough and just bite down on the mouthpiece and keep going. Which is kind of the point, guys. We're into self-defense, we're into survival. So this pandemic is not something that can keep us down unless we get sick, but that's not basically something we can avoid except by not doing stupid stuff and going out and taking stupid chances. So my kind of message for the end of the year, my kind of advice, if you want to heed it or not, is just don't be stupid. I had a long talk with a friend about that, and we can. There's this. He described it well. I like that, and the idea of a Venn diagram. Hopefully, everybody still knows what a Venn diagram is. So, in one circle, there's your civil rights, and guys, I know I talk in English. Most of the people listening to this are living in the United States, but your constitution is not the same as my constitution. Your rights are not the same as mine, constitutionally speaking. It's the same for Italy and France, different countries, the same for China, and so on. So that is something that I would talk to everybody, and me being from a really small country, I'm used to most other people having different laws than we have, is that if you're looking at that circle that talks about constitutional rights, pay attention to the fact that not everybody has the same constitution, which means that the way you talk about it, the way you discuss it, is going to be different. So from my perspective, because I don't live in the US Constitution is just irrelevant. It doesn't enter into the equation for me. So if you're talking about, or a lot of the technical discussions like talking about states' rights, it's not relevant to me. Other things are. You guys don't have the 9 different governments that we have in Belgium. So that's not relevant to you. So that's something that I just want to point out to a lot of people discussing it. It doesn't matter where you live, it's just the world is a really big place. And it's going to be different from one country to the next. And I've been fortunate to travel a lot. So I've lived that experience where you can't make assumptions about different countries because things are just radically different there. So anyway, back to the Venn diagram. So we've got the constitutional rights, and that are often being trampled upon. Same here. But on the other hand, there's also what you can see is the health aspect. Obviously, you don't want to get your loved ones sick, or worse, have them get infected and then pass out, and eventually they don't make it out anymore. You don't want to be guilty of that. And on the other hand, there's obviously the economical aspect, is people need to work, need to earn a living. I'm the guy in the middle of that Venn diagram. Like, I think they're all important. It's not like one over the other. They are all important. But I understand that for some of you, you might be drawn towards one of those circles. Like, okay, this is actually so important for me that the other ones fall away. I understand that. When I talk about don't do stupid things, what I mean is that don't close your eyes for the other circles. Don't assume that they're not important, or don't chastise people for picking a different circle than you for whatever reason. That might be a reason that you don't understand. So, hey, this is, peace and love for all mankind. It's kind of the season for that. That's kind of the reason that I mentioned this. All right. And also that it helps you not end getting mixed up in fights. So that's good for self-defense. Guys, I'm going to stop it here. Wishing you all an excellent New Year's Eve. Keep it safe. If you drink, don't drive, and so on. And hopefully we can meet each other again in 2021 and have a much, much better year. Okay, that's it. I'm out. Bye.
for listening to the Wim Demeere podcast. For more information, go to www.wimsblog.com.